Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where President Trump is, you could say, seeing red. Red cards, red scares, and Russia's red lines. Starting with Russia, the president is set to head to Turkey this evening for a crucial meeting with NATO leaders. High on the NATO summit's agenda, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war in its fourth year with no end in sight. Despite the president's stated belief that both sides are getting close, here's some of what he told reporters today in the Oval Office after speaking with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky over the weekend.
He wants to end it, and Ukraine wants to end it, and we're in talks, and we'll see if we can get it ended. It's a terrible thing. We're getting much closer than people realize, and President Putin wants it to end. I will tell you that very strongly. A good call. And President Zelensky actually wants it to end now. And we're going to be going to NATO, and we're going to be talking about it. And I think we're going to get it. I think we're going to get it ended. It's been a terrible situation.
The president making those remarks after ringing Wall Street's opening bell from the Oval Office to mark the launch of Trump accounts, the tax-advantaged savings accounts for children under the age of 18. The president also confirming he kicked up some unique controversy on the world stage by personally intervening in FIFA's suspension of the U.S.'s top goal scorer over a questionable red card just in time for tonight's knockout game against Belgium, who is coincidentally part of the NATO alliance. We're going to have more on that in just a moment. It all comes after the president's weekend of addresses marking the nation's 250th anniversary, where he telegraphed the White House's midterm strategy, tying recent primary wins by candidates associated with the Democratic Socialists of America to the entire Democratic Party, and trying to stir up fears of a communist takeover.
Communism is a mortal threat to American liberty. It is the greatest threat to our country, including World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, or even 9/11. We resolve and swear for all to hear that the citizens of the United States of America will vanquish communism quickly. Don't let them take too much of your time. You know they're wasting your time, don't you? America will never be a communist country. Won't happen. Communism is a loser, and it always will be. The communist system is the opposite of the American system, and the communist system has never worked. We like to stop a threat like that immediately and before it begins. It's like a cancer. You got to cut it out. You got to cut it out fast. The Stars and Stripes cast the hammer and sickle into oblivion before, and we will do it again if necessary.
NBC's Julie Tsirkin is at the White House for us, and with me on set, senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube and former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. So, Julie, let's start with you. The president is set to leave for Turkey in just a few hours. Where's his head right now, and what is he looking for out of these NATO meetings?
Well, his head right now, Ryan, is on domestic issues. Most notably and importantly for the president is the creation and launch of the Trump accounts, money for American kids. That's what he's been holding events on all day long here in the White House. But he also took many questions from reporters on all subjects surrounding his upcoming travels to Turkey. He said that the only reason he accepted the invitation was because Turkey's President Erdogan is hosting this summit. And that is the first meeting we expect the president to have when he lands there. So with a friendly face before he gets into rooms with some of the NATO allies he's been having issues with. He said he's demanded, actually, that NATO allies be more forthcoming with the U.S., that they spend more on defense. So far, most countries in NATO have been spending 5% of their GDP on defense. They've been giving weapons to Ukraine, buying them from the U.S. But one thing they have not done that the president has been very angry with them on is Iran. They have not helped, they have not sent troops, and they have not helped with the Strait of Hormuz. And also the president, Ryan, is going to come face to face with Giorgia Meloni of Italy, who he had a very public dust-up with in the G7. The president saying she wanted a photo, Meloni saying she did not, and then the president posting a meme of her suggesting he needs a restraining order just yesterday. Ryan?
Yeah, that should make for an awkward conversation. But let's get back to Ukraine. How big of a focus do we expect it to be in this summit? And is it something that President Trump wants to be a focus of these meetings?
Absolutely. The president, according to a senior White House official, is meeting with Zelensky, not a NATO member, the president of Ukraine, but they're meeting anyway on Wednesday to discuss the very pressing issue of ending this war in Ukraine. President Trump was asked about it just today, Ryan. He said that at this point, Zelensky and Russia's President Putin both want to end the war. I'm told for Zelensky's part, he's going to go into this meeting with the president stressing the need and importance for those defense capabilities, more of those missiles like the Patriots, a system that the Ukrainians have been begging for the last couple of months. One we saw overnight in that attack against Kyiv they could have used. So that's definitely going to be a focus for the president. But as many people have been wondering over the last few months, the president's attention has been split with everything going on in the Middle East. He's also set to meet with another non-NATO member, the president of Syria, al-Shara, according to that White House official. So President Trump is going to be extremely busy on Wednesday trying to handle all of these issues as he has been over the last few months. Ryan?
And he'll leave with a whole host of domestic issues in front of him. It comes after a 4th of July weekend where he made the big focus of the country's 250th birthday attacking his political opponents, calling them communists, warning about a dire future if they were to be elected. What does that tell us about his message ahead of the midterms?
Ryan, both the speech at Mount Rushmore on July 3rd and the speech to mark the country's 250th birthday on Saturday night, at times unifying, but at other times extremely sharply political. You played a large amount of what he had to say on communism, but I also want to point out something else he said, which is the need to pass the Save America Act. It's his controversial voter ID proof of citizenship bill that in some cases would require states to submit their voter rolls to the Trump administration. There just aren't the votes for that, and yet he set up his speech calling on Republicans to pass that because he said it could lead to consequences in November, like them losing their elections, suggesting that communists and others that are pouring into this country, as the president said, are going to vote for candidates that are not going to be the Republicans. So very political in his messages on Saturday, certainly previewing what he cares about heading into the midterms here. Ryan?
Okay, Julie Tsirkin, thank you for that. Let's turn now to Courtney and the ambassador who are with me on set. Courtney, let's start with you. It's interesting that we have these potential talks happening at the NATO summit with the goal of maybe trying to calm the situation there, because we've seen actually a major escalation in aerial strikes between Russia and Ukraine. What does that tell us about the posturing ahead of what's going to happen at this summit?
Yeah, so it's not surprising that Vladimir Putin would decide to do something right before a meeting of NATO. His whole goal is to create chaos, to sow instability, and potentially try to do anything that he could that would break apart an alliance. So a major attack on Kyiv isn't particularly surprising on the eve of this summit. We even actually heard today from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who said that this showed that actually Russia was in a weak position, the fact that they launched off these 23 ballistic missiles. What we have to remember, though, is this was an enormous attack on Kyiv, and Ukraine wasn't able to intercept any of those missiles. That does show that despite the fact Ukraine has actually been making advances on the battlefield for several months now, much of 2026 actually has been marked by even sometimes small and sometimes slow advances on the battlefield. It has been Ukraine, and Russia has taken tremendous losses. But this does show that Putin still can hold the capital city at tremendous risk.
Yeah, but Ambassador Taylor, it's interesting. It feels as though this is Groundhog Day a little bit with the situation in Ukraine. As Courtney says, incremental gains, but Russia's taking huge losses. It feels like we've been having that same conversation for 4 years now. What type of expectations should we have heading into this summit? Do we think an actual breakthrough is possible?
So I'm not looking for a breakthrough, Ryan, but I would disagree with the groundhog analogy. As Courtney just said, the Ukrainians now are taking more territory back from the Russians than the Russians are taking from Ukraine. That's a change. That's a big change. The Ukrainians are killing more Russian soldiers than the Russians can recruit. That's a change. The Ukrainians are going very deep into Russia against refineries, against factories that are making those missiles that the Russians are lobbing on Kyiv. That's all those things are a change. The Ukrainians are isolating Crimea. They are cutting off the supplies, fuel, food, ammunition going into Crimea. Crimea is going to be indefensible for the Russians at some point. So that's a change. This is not Groundhog Day.
But is it enough to move Vladimir Putin to actually get to the point where he's willing to negotiate?
We'll see. That's the goal. It's to put enough pressure. And Trump said that Putin's feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
If Putin feels that pressure and he knows that the Americans are there and the Europeans are there and the Ukrainians are there for good, he'll have to find another way.
Well, you mentioned, Courtney, this issue of the Ukrainians' missile defense system being, for the most part, non-existent. President Zelensky sent out an urgent plea over the weekend. He said that missiles for the Patriots are a priority. And of course, we understand that the political will of the United States of America would certainly be enough to make up for the shortage of Patriot missiles, the defensive missiles. But so far, such support has been insufficient. Is this something that the United States military could even do if there were the political will to make it happen?
So right now, remember the way that this is set up is the United States is providing those missiles to NATO allies, and the NATO allies are providing them to Ukraine. It's this new construct that started under President Donald Trump. And what we're talking about here is not the Patriot systems. The U.S. actually started giving the systems to Ukraine in December of 2022, not long after the war started. We're talking about the interceptors, the PAC-2, primarily PAC-3 missiles. And the issue right now for the United States, and frankly for the world, is these things take a long time to build. So it can take months, if not years, at the current rate for them to resupply PAC-3 missiles for the United States. And the U.S. just expended somewhere between 40 and 50% of the U.S. stockpile during the war with Iran. Keep in mind, we don't talk about this very often, but last June at this time, when the U.S. was helping to defend Israel against the 12-day war against Iran, the U.S. also expended a huge number of interceptors and air defense systems during that as well. So they were already at a lower point than they wanted to be. Right now, given the fact that the U.S., it's still plausible that the U.S. restarts major combat operations against Iran. They're ready to do so. It's hard to imagine that they are looking to send dozens or hundreds of them to any of the U.S. allies who could then provide them to Ukraine. That's the problem. It is just a backlog in the need to produce more, and allies around the world who had been providing them to Ukraine, the interceptors, aren't able to do so. And right now, the United States doesn't have a lot of them either.
All right, so Ambassador Taylor, I want to talk more broadly now about NATO itself and whether or not these European allies are willing to step up and provide defense spending at the levels that President Trump has been asking for. I want to play for you a little bit of what I asked the ambassador from the United Kingdom about this topic last week. Take a listen to this. I'm sure the White House is happy with the increase in funding, but I think their argument would be that it is still less than NATO's 3.5% defense spending goal. What is keeping the United Kingdom from reaching that mark?
Well, it's not less because it puts us on the path to that 3.5%. So the 3.5% is by 2035, and this gives us a clear trajectory towards it. All countries are on that trajectory. The challenge for every democratic country is that's a trade-off. And we have schools, we have hospitals, we have voters who are saying they need local services. And that's the difficult democratic decisions any government has to make.
I think President Trump would hear that and say the reason that you can spend money on hospitals is because the United States is helping defend you. Is that going to be enough to pass the Trump smell test, that they're on a path to 3.5% spending?
That's right. I think the Europeans are stepping up, yes, to some degree because Trump has been asking for it, but really they're stepping up because of the Russian threat. The Russians have invaded a European country, have invaded Ukraine. The Europeans know that Ukraine is defending them. It's really defending them from the Russians. And so that's why they're stepping up. They're stepping up because Russia invaded, but they're also stepping up because they're not sure they can count on the Americans forever.
Right.
And this is what we're seeing right here. So the Europeans, on financial basis, that $105 billion loan that they provided to the Ukrainians gets them through 2 years of fiscal breathing room, the Pearl support coming from Europeans, from American factories into Ukraine. That's dwarfing what we're doing right now.
Okay. All right. Ambassador Taylor, Courtney, thank you guys both for being here. We have to talk about the World Cup now, the drama surrounding that. U.S. star striker Folarin Balogun will be eligible to play in tonight's round of 16 game against Belgium. This after FIFA reversed the one-game ban for the red card that he earned in last week's match against Bosnia and Herzegovina. The news came as the president, who has a close relationship with FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, said he personally called FIFA to review the call.
I understand sports really well. And that wasn't a foul. That wasn't even an infraction. He gave him a red card. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't think it meant much. Then I started hearing that means he can't play in the next game. How do you penalize him for a game that hasn't been played yet? It's very unfair. You can't do that. So Yes, I asked for a review by FIFA. I'm good at this stuff. I didn't think it was a foul. And I think the referee's call was horrible. And nobody talks about that. They talk about the red card like it's fine. Nobody talks. The referee's decision to red card. I didn't know what the hell a red card was. When I found out, I said, you got to be kidding. All I did was ask for a review. I didn't say, you have to do this. This man is a smart, tough man, Gianni Infantino. We're going to have a full team, and Belgium's going to have a full team. And you know what? If they beat us, then they can be really proud. The other way, if they beat us, we'll say it was rigged, just like the election was rigged in 2020.
Well, in a statement today, Infantino acknowledged that he spoke with the president, but insisted the decision to reverse the red card, which is the first time it's done so during a World Cup since 1962, was made independently. The decision has stirred up even more controversy over what some argue was a controversial red card to begin with. Today, FIFA rejecting an appeal by the Belgian national team ahead of tonight's game. And the U.S. and Belgium are set to kick off in Seattle tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, as if the whole world weren't already watching that game. Joining me now from the White House is NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Steve Patterson is in Seattle ahead of tonight's game. So, Kelly, NBC is reporting the administration inserted themselves into this basically as soon as the game against Bosnia and Herzegovina ended. Just walk us through the timeline here and explain just how much the White House was involved.
Well, it appears the White House exerted some degree of presence, if not interference. It really depends on how you read the president inserting himself. Clearly, he talked about the fact today that he is a sports fan, knows a lot about sports, and then also acknowledged he wasn't sure what a red card was, wasn't sure what the call meant. And so the president, as he often does, uses the force of his personality and the strength of his relationships on various situations. And that's clearly part of what was at play here. Also, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, was there in real time shortly after the incident. The collision of two great athletes happened. And there's been a lot of discussion by people who know a lot more about this than me that collision was not necessarily malicious, might not have in other circumstances resulted in a red card. I'll leave that for others to decide. But that's some of the background and the context here. Then the question comes, well, what happens? And so a top U.S. player would have been out for a game, a critical game tonight. And now the questions are really about, was the president, as head of state, and of course the U.S. being the host country for the entire tournament, was the president's use of his contact with his good friend, the head of FIFA, was that a step too far? The president says he couldn't tell him what to do, but clearly the president made it known the outcome that he wanted, and that is the outcome that he got. But are the steps in any way questionable? And as you pointed out, the FIFA president also says there's a separate judicial process that handles this kind of thing. FIFA has been accused of not always playing by the rules in the past. That's part of this whole background here. And, of course, there's a lot on the line with the game tonight and the impact of what it can mean. So that gives you a sense of where we are right now, and fans will make some decisions themselves.
First of all, you've got to give yourself a little credit there, Kelly. That was a pretty good explanation about what happened there on the field. That was pretty
steady,
good.
Ryan.
Yeah. Let's get back, though, to what you mentioned about FIFA. This is an organization that in its own right has battled corruption within its ranks for some time. Is there any concern from the White House that intervening here could at the very least be bad optics?
Nothing that's discernible. The president was certainly asked about that, knowing that there will be fans around the world who will question it. Clearly, Belgium questioned it and was determined they didn't have standing to make this complaint, according to FIFA. They are the opponent tonight. And so there will be those who will put an asterisk after this game, whichever way it goes. The president tried to sort of pump the brakes there by saying if Belgium wins, then they will have the pride of knowing they went up against the best U.S. team with a star player being included and on the field tonight. But no indication from the White House that they think the president interfered too much. Again, this is really classic President Trump, using relationships, his close ties to FIFA, using the strength of being the host country and all the U.S. has done to welcome FIFA, to make it a well-organized and successful tournament thus far, still a ways to go. So no hint that that's an issue. Others will say it, and it'll be left to those to decide what is the outcome of the game, did it have an impact, and might it change other attempts to police the action in some other way. Ryan?
Okay, Kelly, thank you for that. Let's get to the ground, on the ground, I should say, in Seattle, where Steve is standing by. Steve, you've been talking to fans all day. I have to imagine you've heard a lot of hot takes. What's the latest from the fans there? And also, how is the team preparing for tonight's game with the news now that they could have their best player in the lineup?
Yeah, a lot of hot takes, as you mentioned, Ryan, but most of them really sort of divided, right? There's a lot of people, of course, elated, excited, happy that one of the star players, the leading scorer, the guy that has scored in every single match of this World Cup so far, happy he's going to be on the pitch, but sort of divided in the fact that they didn't want it to be like this, a White House intervention, possibly putting an asterisk on a possible victory. I also, as you mentioned, spoke with one of the players, Sebastian Berhalter, as this news was breaking in large yesterday. He said, as you might imagine, the classic sports answer, they are laser focused on the action on the field. They can't control what happens off of it. But I asked him about the moment he heard, and I want you to hear the reaction. Listen to this.
You know, to be honest, I think that's something that, you know, maybe the red card shouldn't have been there in the first place. So, yeah, I think we're super excited for him.
Did you guys hear as a team?
Yeah, it was like we just got on the bus to training, and then we just saw social media, like, started to pop off. And then, yeah, everyone was asking Balo, and he was like, yeah, like, I'm in. And then everyone just, like, got hype, and we were just, yeah, pumped for him.
Big cheering moment?
Yeah, like, yes and no. We were just, everyone was just kind of thought there was no, like, we were confused, you know. And then I think, like, over the next 30 minutes, like, everyone kind of, bits and pieces found out.
Meanwhile, everybody's excited for the game. We're here at the Seattle waterfront. You can see fans heading into this fan fest. You can take you in for a little bit. You can see the game, Portugal and Spain in the background. People watching, of course, ready to cheer on the United States. Again, a lot of the reaction we heard divided. We even heard from some Belgian fans who thought that red card should have never existed in the first place. So back and forth. Ryan.
But what about, do we know for sure that Balogun is going to be in the starting lineup tonight? Has the team said that? What do we know about the decision-making process there?
Great question. We just saw the team release their starting roster about an hour and a half ago or so. That thing is usually ironclad. He's in the lineup according to the latest listing. Of course, that could change, but we hear intervention at this point is a moot point because FIFA has ruled that that appeal is essentially not effective. It will not take effect today. Of course, again, you know, we've seen so many miraculous and things we've never seen during a World Cup in this sort of burst of news, so anything could happen, but as far as we know, he will be on the pitch. Ryan?
Okay, now all we have to do is play the game. All right, Steve Patterson, thank you for that report.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.